I'm a professor of transport policy at Molde University College. Molde is a small town in Norway near Trondheim, and the University College has a specialism in transport and logistics. And I've been a professor of transport policy and public transport in the UK and in Sweden, as well as in Molde. And my main area of expertise is public transport. I was the founding director of Sweden's National Public Transport Research Centre. And I've done a lot of work in public transport economics and comparative public transport policy, so amongst other areas. I'm also an expert in sustainable urban mobility and especially parking policy. Public transport has a very important role in moving people in big corridors or in large numbers in areas where there's not necessarily enough space for lots of cars. And it also obviously has a bright future in terms of moving people in a more environmentally friendly way. And, you know, even if we all were to shift to electric cars, they still take up a lot of space. So obviously in urban areas, where would you park them? You'd still get congestion, all those types of things. And also, when we do some analysis about how we can reach our carbon dioxide reduction goals, then we find that just shifting to other forms of propulsion for the cars just isn't enough. It won't do enough quickly. So we need a shift to public transport and cycling and walking as well. Obviously, COVID and the pandemic does have, it's been pretty bad news for public transport, there's no doubt about it. And I think it's going to take quite a long time for public transport to react and to recover. And there will be some people who were using public transport who probably don't go back to it. So I think there'll be a bit of a rethink of the role of public transport in the future. But it certainly has a very clear future for moving large numbers of people, particularly in urban areas and between urban areas, and between suburbs and the centres of cities. Well, I used to live and work in the southwest of Sweden, and that's a place where the number of trips by public transport has roughly doubled in about the last 20 years. And there is the city of Malmö in that part of Sweden, but at the same time, there are many, many small towns and cities, and it's quite a rural part of Sweden. Most of Sweden is rural, obviously, but there's a lot of rural parts of this very big part of Sweden that, you know, it's certainly the same kind of size as maybe central Slovenia. It's perhaps 80 kilometers across, 120 kilometers from north to south. It's a big area, and they have increased both the number of trips made by public transport, but also the share of trips that are made by public transport. And they haven't just done that in urban areas, they've done that in rural areas as well. So how did they do it? They spent money, right? There's no getting away from the fact that they did spend money. Public transport it's a public service, right? Now, I didn't do the investigation. One of my colleagues at the Urban Planning Institute of Slovenia, András Hudoklin, he did some research for me on the Slovenian government website to try and find out just how much Slovenia actually spends on its bus services. So if we look at how much you do spend, it's about, if you include the subsidy for the bus services in Maribor and the bus services in Ljubljana, then if I'm right, you spend roughly about 92 million euros per year. Yeah. So if you've got a population of 2 million people, then that's about 46 euros per head, per person. Yeah. Now in Sweden, they spend something like 80 euros per person per year on bus services. So not actually a massive difference, but a significant difference nonetheless. So you've got to think, yeah, probably we do have to spend some money, but buses themselves are cheap, relatively cheap. Certainly compared to railways, it might come as a surprise to you that the Slovenian railway system gets 346 million euros of public funding per year, which when you consider that almost no trips in Slovenia are made by train at the moment, and that's a lot of money. That's a lot of money. Railways soak up quite a lot of money. Now, what do they do in this part of Sweden to, and in rural areas as well as in urban areas to make bus more user friendly? Nice buses, nice drivers, simple fares, cheap fares, relatively cheap fares. So if you want to travel by bus for this and train for this whole area, this big area I talked about, southwest Sweden, if you want a monthly pass, it costs you about 130 euros, 140 euros for unlimited train and unlimited bus travel all over this big part of Sweden. And because they have so many passengers, they actually get quite a lot of money for running the system from the money that the passengers pay. About 50% of the system's money comes from the money that the passengers pay. And then they did things like introducing new routes, fast routes that use motorways, right? So not your kind of bus that spends loads of times going loads of times on some little road in the back of the country, stopping off at every single house kind of thing. No, they said, all right, that's not so attractive. We've got to run our buses fast. So not only are they got to be nice new buses running on biofuel, but with nice drivers, or at least relatively nice drivers, but they've got to be fast to make them attractive, and they've got to go where people want to go. So they make sure, for example, like the big employment sites are served by these bus services. And I think that's an example of how you can make buses a bit more attractive. And if we look at Sweden overall, about 14% of all trips are made by public transport, which compares to about 5% in Slovenia. So there's some way to go in Slovenia. In that part of southwest Sweden, it's more like 9% of trips are made by public transport overall, which is because it's quite rural in many parts, and there's no getting away from it. It can be quite difficult to serve rural areas very, very well by public transport, but there are things that you can do. You can improve the services, you can improve the routes, you can also add on some kind of demand responsive transport, it's called, where you have a service that people can book. So also in that part of southwest Sweden, there is a service like that. So there are some buses, most buses run on a timetable, but there are some that run on a timetable, but they only run if people phone for them. And then those buses link into the big buses. And that helps people in rural areas to have a choice as well. They made it as fast as possible. They made it easy to understand, cheap to use, especially for regular users, convenient to use because it's integrated. So the trains and the buses are integrated. You don't need, you just have one ticket and then you can go wherever you want with that one ticket. Yeah, those are the main things. I mean, I don't think it's the case that you have to be Swedish to want to use public transport. You have to have a good service, but you have to have a good service to attract people to use it. A good service is a fast service, a good value in terms of price, and comfortable to use in terms of the quality of the vehicles, the quality of the experience. One reason why Slovenia has relatively low public transport use is because outside the cities, land use has become very dispersed. People live in towns, but they live in low density towns or low density villages. They're not traveling particularly long distances. I mean, the average distance traveled per person per day in Slovenia, according to the Slovenian government website, is about 13 kilometers, which is exactly the same as it is in Germany, which has much, much higher public transport use. But the thing about Slovenia is that your land use has become, I think, especially since the end of Yugoslavia, it's become much more dispersed. If you had, especially in the Ljubljana region, which is where the majority of your people live, I suppose, a suburban railway or suburban tram network or tram train network using the existing rail infrastructure, then really that would be a structure for land use, and you would start to see around the stations higher density land use, and so you could possibly reverse this trend of urban sprawl that you have in Slovenia. And urban sprawl just does not support public transport. There's no getting away from it. You know, if you want public transport, you shouldn't have urban sprawl. It's possible to, on highways, it's possible to build busways, which is a segregated track on the highway for the bus. So the buses can bypass queues on the highway. And so that would be something to consider, certainly in the Ljubljana region, where you have significant congestion on the highways at rush hour. Yeah, you can get a lot more people on a, well, there are busways, sorry, in the world that carry far more people than most railways or even underground systems. So the most heavily used busway is in Istanbul, and it's on a motorway. It's on the main ring road in Istanbul, and yeah, it carries more people than most underground lines in the world. It's so heavily serviced. But I draw your attention to the distribution of passengers on the railway network at the moment in Slovenia. The vast majority of passengers who use the train in Slovenia at the moment are people who are traveling regionally in the Ljubljana region. They're people who are going to university or work in Ljubljana and taking the train from the surrounding area. So they're not actually traveling very large distances on the train. Ljubljana has actually quite an extensive rail network at the moment, yeah? The problem is, it's not so much the speeds as the frequency of the trains. Like the timetable is very hard to understand. So, you know, coming in from what's the town just past the airport? Kran. If you're getting a train from Kran, you know, there's one period where there's a train every 20 minutes, and then you have to wait 2 hours at some point. It's that kind of frequency. So it's a very unattractive service. Those lines would require well, I think there's a strong grounds for doing a study to assess the level of investment required to turn that into much more of a kind of suburban rail system, operating at least half-hourly frequencies, maybe 20-minute, maybe 15-minute frequencies, kind of on a German model, possibly as a tram train, which is something they have in Karlsruhe in Germany. Because speed is not the essence of speed, it's reliability and frequency that's really the key thing in those relatively short distance journeys. And if you established a proper city railway network in the Ljubljana metropolitan region, that would also start to attract land use around the stations. And I think that's really, really crucial. The ideal public transport system has to be integrated with an ideal land use system. So public transport and land use go kind of hand in hand. So you need medium density development to support a high quality public transport system. So by medium density, I mean something around 45 dwellings per hectare, something like that. There's a very famous development in Freiburg in Germany called Vauban, which is very public transport orientated and walking and cycling orientated. It's very pleasant, but it's not single family houses. It's, you know, yeah, around 45 dwellings per hectare. What would the actual public transport system look like? It would look, well, not totally dissimilar to what we have today. I think it probably would be driverless, you know, in 40 years, so 30, 40 years. You know, there are already driverless trains. It's just trade unions don't like them. But there have been driverless trains on the London Underground since 1968. But even in bus traffic, there are experiments now with driverless buses. So, yeah, they'll probably be driverless in the future, which would bring down the operating costs. But other than that, I hope that an ideal public transport system would look clean, safe, frequent, and cheap to use. I don't know. I haven't seen any surveys about what Slovenian people think about public transport. I think the main reason why people don't use it is because it's not convenient for them. Yeah. Yeah. And so the main reason that it's not convenient for them is it doesn't go where they live, or if it does go where they live, it doesn't go frequently enough, right? Or it's too expensive compared to using the car. As far as I think I checked out a fare from Novo Mesto to Ljubljana is €10, which is, it's quite a lot, really. So I would say those are principal reasons why people aren't using it. And it's also related to land use. The fact it doesn't go where they want to go is to do with land use, as we said before. Are there other reasons why some people do have a snobby viewpoint about public transport? And is there anything that you can do about that? As I keep saying, ensuring that the buses themselves are clean and attractive and new and have Wi-Fi and have a nice driver, and the waiting facilities, if you have to wait, the waiting facilities are reasonably good. And then some public awareness campaigns as well, especially if you can link it to the use of public transport by opinion informers and celebrities and so on. Yeah. So don't just have somebody like me going, oh, you should use public transport, it's good for the environment. No, have somebody that people, identify with, some going, public transport, it's not as bad as you think, give it a try, this kind of thing. Yeah. So a bit of the awareness raising and marketing is important, absolutely. Return to the example of Sweden, the southwest Sweden, I would say there has been a strong element of providing demand so that people then use it. So, for example, if they open a new railway station on an existing railway line, they have a minimum target number of departures, like services that they want to stop at the new station per day, which I think is somewhere in the region of 20 per day, right? And a half-hourly service in the rush hours. So they provide the service without being absolutely certain that there's a lot of people who are going to use it. So I think there's strong grounds for saying, yeah, we should provide service and then people will use it. Yeah. And investing and not predicting demand, but actually sort of trying to generate demand by providing more service. There's a lot of experience from the UK where, especially in the off-peak, additional service was provided because basically in public transport operations you have to have enough buses or enough trains and drivers to run the service in the rush hour when there's usually the highest demand. But then, well, what do you do with those drivers and vehicles in the off-peak? And so the approach in Britain has been, well, we might as well just use them and we'll have a high frequency in the off-peak as well. And that has generated demand because people are making leisure trips. They realize they can make leisure trips or shopping trips or whatever in the off-peak because the service is very good. The good service attracts them. Germany and Sweden have very, very strong car industries as well. But that doesn't mean they haven't been able to develop strong public transport systems and put a lot of money into those public transport systems. So I don't see the two as necessarily, incompatible. Actually, I think more of an issue is the road construction lobby, yeah, and where they feel they're going to make most money from public investment. But I also see in other countries, for example, the UK, that the road construction lobby has realized that probably it's not going to be successful in getting all the roads built that it once built. So it's now turned its attention to building railways instead. Civil engineering can be used to build railways as well as it can be used to build roads. But I would actually, that doesn't mean that I'm advocating like a nationwide network of high-speed rail for Slovenia. Like I said before, relatively low cost investments, especially in the Ljubljana region network, to upgrade the existing railway infrastructure. Shouldn't cost very much, but could reap very, very big benefits. If you look at the cost of upgrading freight railway lines to passenger railway lines in Germany, in Austria, in Italy. You're talking sort of cost of 1 to 2 million euros per kilometre to upgrade those railway lines so that they provide a service that's travelling at 80 to 100 kilometres per hour and travelling every half hour, every 20 minutes. That's an attractive, fast service over a 25 to 30 kilometre kind of distance. And 1 to 2 million euros per kilometre to do the upgrade. It's not a lot, really, especially in comparison to the billions that are used for road construction. I think spend a bit more money on the bus services in particular. Review and one way of getting better value for money from that is to review the current contracting arrangements. I don't know how they function, but often new contracts can secure better value for money, more service, more high quality service run for less money. But then the other basic points are improve the quality of the service, meaning more frequent services, faster services, services running with newer vehicles and with well-behaved drivers who drive well and offer good customer service, and make it cheap to use, especially for frequent users. Sweden putting 80 euros per head into bus public transport, whereas you put about 46 euros per person, right? But then, yes, of course, it's a more expensive country, Sweden, and a wealthier country. Because it's more expensive, then that should mean that investments and certainly running services is a bit cheaper in Slovenia. So, I'm not saying that you need to increase the amount of money that you put into bus services to 80 euros per head, but maybe 60 euros a head, 65 euros a head. Slovenia is no longer a super not poor country, but I checked out the purchasing power parity adjusted gross domestic product per person, and in Slovenia I think it's about $42,000 per year, and in Britain 49,000. So Sweden a bit more, about 55,000. That's taking into account lower costs in some areas in Slovenia. So you're pretty much a high income country now. So I'm not sure I necessarily accept that you don't have the money.